Hello, everybody. We are here with Diane Lorz Benitez, and she's going to be talking about her memoir, which is currently out, called Without a Second Thought, about her time living in Spain, married to a civil engineer during Franco's regime. Diane, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Jared. How are you?
Doing well. Just to start off here, one of the first pages of your book, in one of the first pages, you write that most Spaniards chose silence rather than speak out about the Civil War. Did you notice people opening up on this topic in later years? Or if you were, since you were a foreigner, did you notice that this was kind of a difficult conversation to have?
Yeah, good question. I'll answer the second part first. Being a foreigner had nothing to do with that kind of information given to me. I married into a very progressive, open Spanish family, and I never at any time felt any resistance to my being an American. They just thought, oh, bring an American into the family, isn't that great? So there weren't any secrets in that respect. That people, sorry about that people spoke more freely about the Spanish Civil War in later years. They did as soon as Franco died. But for all the years that I lived there, except for the last one, Franco was in control. Franco was the fascist leader. He won the war. He was running the government. And you either went along with that wholeheartedly or you were quiet because it was illegal to do a lot of things. But that said, I never felt repressed. It's true that if you were Spanish, a Spanish woman, you couldn't travel with your children without your husband's permission. You couldn't work without his permission. You couldn't own a business. You couldn't have a bank account. But I was an American citizen. I had also a Spanish passport. And I just pulled out whichever one was convenient. So I never felt repressed. But once Franco died and the more moderate politicians began to have a voice, then people spoke more frequently about it. But for instance, I didn't know until years after I left Spain that the Franco regime was taking the children, the babies, from the mothers of their political enemies and putting them up for adoption. It happened particularly with unwed women who would go into a hospital thinking they were having a child, and the doctor might return later and say, so sorry, your baby died. And that wasn't true.
Wow, that's
I
incredible.
didn't know that for years, and it happened. And you can Google around now and find women who had that experience. And the war stories that came out after Franco's death, when people felt free to speak, had to do with atrocities which were committed on both sides. I mean, war is a terrible thing. But women who would say, they said they were taking my husband to prison because he had leftist tendencies, and they took him out to the edge of the field and shot him. And I can never find his body. There were mass graves that people were clamoring to know what happened. So that was when the floodgates were opened, so to speak, and all these terrible stories came out. But during the time that I lived there, people weren't talking about that. I mean, you just hadn't better.
Right, yeah, that's very interesting. So I was wondering about it, because when reading, I noticed there wasn't much conversation about it as well. And in people you encountered, yeah, I guess that, yeah, it's best not to. Yeah,
we had Spanish, we had family anecdotes like my husband, whose parents during the siege of Madrid, contacted the the International Red Cross, and made arrangements to get him as a 12 or 13-year-old child out of the city. But that was just a little family anecdote. Oh, Alberto, oh yeah, I was 13. I was on a train to France and all over Europe trying to get away from the Franco troops. But no more than that. Or my mother-in-law would talk about the lack of food, which was terrible. I mean, they were eating all kinds of strange things.
Mm.
But they were anecdotal rather than a big war story,
Right.
if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's very interesting. Just kind of going off what you were talking about with just being a married woman in Spain, the fact that a married woman could not, this is from your book right here, a married woman could not open a bank account, buy a car, work, apply for a passport, or take her children out of the country without her husband's consent. I know that you talked a bit about this already, but how did you feel about that particular restriction, that particular treatment toward married women? How did you feel about it then, and how do you feel about it now, looking back from a more modern perspective?
I have to tell you, the more I think about the title of my book, Without a Second Thought, the more weight it seems to have, because I wasn't thinking about that at the time. I mean, I didn't give a second thought to any of those things because they didn't affect me, and they didn't affect any of my Spanish girlfriends. Somehow they got around it. I mean, birth control was illegal. A doctor could go to jail if he prescribed birth control.
Wow.
But my Spanish girlfriend said, oh, you can get around that. Say you've got migraines, they give you pills for migraines.
Mhm.
So there was a way around things. So, now I think, oh, how did these women survive at all with so many restrictions? And there was such it was almost a cult of motherhood. There was a Spanish program a couple of times a year when a financial prize, was given to a woman who had had the most children.
Really?
And these were, for the most part, women with little or no education who lived in a village, who didn't even know there was such a thing as birth control. So they were poor and uneducated, to make it a blanket statement. And here on television, they'd say, oh, and here's Lucia from the village X, and she's had 17 children, and let's have a round of applause for this woman with 17 children, and we'll give her a check for something. It was cultivated. So these women thought they were doing a fine thing. The more kids, the merrier. The more they struggle, the better.
It's interesting, given the what you were talking about with having an issue with food supply and all of that. That's an interesting thing that people want.
Yeah, this was after the war, but
Okay.
the war ended in 36. The food supply changed, I would say, by the 40s. And I lived there in the 60s. So this was years later, but it was that control by the Catholic Church and Franco, who was more Catholic than the Pope. And
Wow.
yeah, these women didn't question it, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, I guess, as we said last time, it's one of those best not to situations. But one thing that I really noticed throughout your book is that you describe scenes, images, landscapes, food, conversations very vividly, so vividly. I was wondering if you kept a journal, or if you felt the need, like a journal while you were there, or if you felt the need to return to Spain to kind of remember some of these really vivid scenes that you were discussing.
No, I never kept a journal. I wish that I had. And you're not the only person to ask me about my memory. How do you remember? I just have a quirky memory. My children tease me. my daughter say, ask mom what she had for dinner 3 weeks ago on Sunday, and she'll probably tell you. I can't help it, especially with food. I always remember what I eat. But the other thing is, well, I've been back to Spain more times than I can count. And every time I go back, I have a niece or a nephew or an old girlfriend who said, do you remember the day that? And so even if that memory was fading, I have somebody who's making it fresh again. So I didn't feel the need to go back because of the writing, but because of going back, it was easier to write. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, I think that I lived those years with some kind of a heightened sensibility toward language and my surroundings. I wanted so much to be a part of that society that I noticed everything. I noticed light switches. I noticed everything that was different from the way I was brought up. And I loved learning Spanish. And I was married to a brilliant man who could give me the etymology of a word, at the drop of a hat. So I was just aware of that, and I loved it. And remembering it was never a problem. I mean, I remember days when I learned a certain word, and that was the afternoon that my sister-in-law told me that, an example, embarazada, spelled like embarrassed, embarazada, I thought meant I was embarrassed. So I told somebody that I was embarazada because of a certain event. And my sister-in-law told me later that embarazada doesn't mean embarrassed, it means pregnant. And so I was telling somebody that I was pregnant when I was not.
That's quite funny.
I just don't forget things like that. And I remember the afternoon that my sister-in-law said, no.
Oh, yeah. That's very interesting about the language. So I know that you must be fluent in most regards for Spanish because you lived there for so long. I mean,
yeah,
20 years. Yeah. Do your children also speak Spanish? Because they were there for quite a bit of time. Yeah?
My youngest daughter was 6 and my oldest was 9 when we came to the States. And they were both fluent in Spanish. And the youngest one barely spoke English. I just shoved her in the first grade one and said, she'll understand you, but I don't know if she's going to be able to respond. And some place along her little journey, her mind said, look, I'm going to speak one language or the other, but I ain't going to do both. And she spoke English. My older daughter always had a gift for languages, and she thought it was fun to speak 2 languages. And she's fluent now in Spanish and French. And the younger one had to study it in school to refresh her memory. I tried. That's interesting. I tried to speak Spanish once we were in the States because it's the language around you that's going to influence what you speak. It's the television, it's your friends, so I thought I've got to hold up the Spanish end of it. But at one point they both just shrugged their shoulders and said, why are you doing this? It's not natural for you and you don't have to. And so I kind of let it slip as far as the girls were concerned. But we're all good now.
Right, yeah. I mean, I'm sure if they're, watching TV and such, they're trying to watch some cartoon when they're younger and maybe they might understand. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And do you guys all kind of return to Spain quite a lot? Do you guys all that's great.
We do.
That's really nice. Well, because this is another question I have here. Do you have advice for people because you started your family in Spain? Do you have advice for people who would be starting a family in a foreign country?
Yeah. I do. I would say do your homework.
That's good.
Without a second thought. It's if you have that so-called adventuresome spirit, it's lovely. If you don't, you can get yourself in real hot water. But
Mhm.
um, I would do it again. It's it was exciting. It was enriching. It was frustrating. It's all of that. Um,
Mhm.
but I would, if somebody were doing it, going off, it's just do a bit of homework because maybe something will change your mind. Had I known about the Franco regime to the degree that I do now, I don't know if I would have gone. I mean, I think that country would have sounded forbidding, and who wants to be part of that? But I only knew my husband's views, and he said, yes, he said, we have a dictator, but he's benevolent. And I knew the word benevolent, and so I thought everything was fine. Well, it was fine for me, but not for a lot of other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go live in a country with and have children, do some homework.
That's good advice. Well, I mean, that is interesting actually. Because I mean, if you had learned all that beforehand, before going into it, you wouldn't have that kind of um, handy those handy tips from your friends who kind of knew the lay of the land, who could kind of navigate around those things. Yeah,
Yeah.
might have seemed a bit more frightening. But on the topic of the actual book itself, for any aspiring writers out there, do you have any advice on getting published, submitting manuscripts, on writing in general? Any sort of, um, I guess I could phrase that better. How would you go about publishing a memoir? Like, how did you go about it?
Um, I was I did what I was supposed to do, but I was lucky. Um, I, I I was incredibly lucky. The first thing I did was write to try to find an agent. And, I worked for weeks on this famous query letter to an agent. And I sent out two. And I didn't hear from one. And then I got a reply from the second one who said, we dove into your memoir. We think all this, well, she said a lot of nice things. Unfortunately, we find it hard to sell memoirs at this time, but maybe you will find somebody who feels differently. Well, I thought, well, if that's a rejection, I'll take that any day because she found nice things to say about the book. So I thought, well, I guess I'll send out some more query letters. I mean, you're supposed to send them out like 50 at a time. It's a long process. But in the meantime, I went to a bookstore where a small press, the owner of a small press, was giving a presentation. So I thought, I'll go see what this lady has to say. Well, you just instinctively like some people and find them approachable. And that's what I felt about this woman. And when we left, I said to my co-writing buddy, gosh, I really liked Christine. Um, wouldn't it be funny if she would be interested in my book? And my friend said, oh, I know her. I'll introduce you. Come to the Tucson Book Fair with me next week. So we went to the book fair and Christine showed up, the owner of the small press. And my friend said, this is my friend Diane. She's written a memoir. And Christine said, oh, that's nice. And she, no, but it's really good. Oh, yeah, I'm sure it is. It's about Spain. Oh, Spain, that's nice. No, she said, my friend kept pushing the book. And finally, Christine said, oh, send it to me. I'll read it. I did. And a week later, she sent me a contract. I mean, this is unheard of in the writing world. And it was just luck. So my advice to other writers is, first of all, write what you love, write because you love it. Don't write for an audience, just do what's right for you. And then work like a dog to get it published if that's what you want. But usually it's a long road. And what I know now that I didn't, or what I think I know now that I didn't before, is that self-publishing is not as kind of scoffed at as it once was. I shouldn't be telling that to you, but
No, right. Yeah, I've actually, yeah, I've heard quite a bit about self-publishing as well. Yeah, no, that's
Um,
a good road as well. I think, there's a lot to be done in that. And no, thank you for your insight on that. That is interesting. I wouldn't say it's purely luck. I'd say it's a very good memoir as well.
thank you.
And we will just close it up there. Just wanted to let everybody know that Without a Second Thought is actually discounted currently on ipgbook.com. You can get it there and order it. It's a hardback copy, which is very, very good these days. And then there's also an ebook option if you prefer that. Yes. Thank you so much, Diane, for doing that.
Sure, thank you. Best of luck to you.
Thank you very much.